Most of you know Gandhi as the great political leader. But simultaneously, literally simultaneously, he was the leader of, depending on the year, of an ashram, different ashrams. An ashram is like a cult. And he was a very strict taskmaster, which is a very euphemistic way of saying he was a complete and total dictator. He was in the ashram. And he set down very strict rules. You want to be a member of my ashram? No meat, vegetarians, no sex, brahmacharis, no idle jokes, no reading in the toilet, no wristwatches, no underwear. That's right. He was very tough in what he demanded of his followers. He was even so tough that he made them keep a diary in which they had to account for what they did every minute of every day, because he thought it was sinful to squander time. And then he read the diaries. He was Big Brother with a vengeance. But Gandhi understood there's a world of difference between an ashram, a cult, and a political movement. He didn't set as requirements for membership in the Indian Congress Party that you can't have sex or wear underwear, because he would lose the broad public. And so we have to be careful about the goal that we set. Well, having formulated it that way, what should be our goal? And here it seems to me the answer is straightforward, uncontroversial, and obvious. You simply look at the most representative political institutions in the world today. You look at the most respected institutions in the world today, and then you see, what do they have to say about the Israel-Palestine conflict? They are as representative institutions as we're going to get. So let's start with the most obvious, the most representative political institution in the world today, I doubt anybody would dispute, is the United Nations General Assembly. And every year, the UN General Assembly, it votes on a resolution in November of every year. It votes on a resolution entitled Peaceful Settlement of the Palestine Question. And every year, it puts forth the same terms for resolving the conflict. And those terms are a two-state settlement on the June 1967 border, a full Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and a just resolution of the refugee question. Those are the terms that's put forth. And every year, the vote is the same. To sample the record, I could go back to 1989, but I'll go back much later to 1997 and just sample the record. The vote, 1997, 155 to 2. The two negative votes, Israel, United States. 2004, the vote, 161 to 7. The whole world on one side, Israel, the US, Australia, Grenada, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau on the other side. Incidentally, they all, as I think John Dugard calls them, the powerhouses of the Pacific. They all lined up with the U.S. and UNESCO also. The U.S. also got Vanuatu this time. 2008, the vote, 164 to 7. the whole world on one side, Israel, the US, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, and Palau on the other side. And 2010, the last time the vote was taken, 165 to 7. Again, the whole world on one side, the US, Israel, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, and Palau on the other side. For those of you who haven't heard of Nauru and Palau, with all due respect to small countries, their combined populations can fit in the aisles of this room. And there will be room left over. But, again, with all due respect to them, they probably won't be lining up in the United States much longer if global warming continues. If you turn to the regional organizations, some might say, well, what about those Arabs? Where do they stand in all this? And in fact, the Arabs have a say in all this. They have their own regional organization called the Arab League. It's comprised of 22 Arab countries. In March 2002, it put forth what it called the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Arab Peace Initiative echoed the UN General Assembly, calling for a two-state settlement at the June '67 border with a just resolution of the refugee question. They've reiterated that peace initiative periodically, most recently in March 2009 in the Arab League. What was the vote in the Arab League? The vote was 22 to 0. Okay, but what about those Islamic states, those crazy Muslims? Where do they stand? And in fact, the Islamic states have their own organization. It's called the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the OIC. It consists of 57 countries, and they voted in 2002, well, I'll quote them. We have adopted the Arab Peace Initiative to resolve the issue of Palestine in the Middle East. What was the vote in the OIC? The vote was 57 to 0. Incidentally, the 57 countries included the Islamic State Republic of Iran. And when I went through those General Assembly votes, where I said 164 to 7, 165 to 7, and the majority joining the rest of the world was the Islamic Republic of Iran since 2004. So they're well within the majority. The only possible conclusion one can reach from these votes is that the only obstacle is to resolving the conflict, judging by the votes. The only obstacles are Israel and the United States, leaving aside the South Sea atolls. Well, some people might say, you know, maybe what you're saying is true, but that's because of the tyranny of the majority. Tyranny of the majority is one of those terms that's contrived by political scientists to serve their masters. And it came into popular usage during the 1970s when the General Assembly was no longer voting the American way because of what was called the Soviet Third World Bloc. When the world votes with you, it's called democracy, and when it votes against you, it's called the tyranny of the majority. So, let's leave aside this tyrannical institution called democracy, and let's move to, instead, the most respected legal body in the world. Namely, nobody, I think, would dispute, the International Court of Justice. And as it happens, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, it did render its opinion on the critical issues, or on 3 of the 4 critical issues bearing on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Number 1, it said in 2004 in its advisory opinion, it said that under international law, it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. Israel acquired the West Bank and Gaza in the course of a war, namely